in the Grand Prix of Europe, and the Benetton team go berserk.
At the end of last year, the Benetton Formula One racing team was definitely on top.
And Michael Schumacher wins in Japan to equal Nigel Mansell's all-time record of 9 wins in one season, to give Benetton the Constructors' Championship. And he said yesterday that that was his goal, and he's done it. A wonderful, wonderful day for Benetton. And look at them, joy unbridled.
The problem with being at the top, of course, is staying there. For a start, Benetton's champion driver, Schumacher, has now gone to Ferrari. How much does success depend on the driver? Or is it the car that's the star? QED was given a look behind the scenes at Benetton as they prepared for the 1996 season. A season with not only a new car, but also 2 new drivers. However, in this highly competitive world of Formula One, it pays not to let your rivals see too much. Benetton, the Italian clothing manufacturer, acquired its British-based racing team about 10 years ago. But it's only in the last few years that it's had its rapid rise to glory, winning prize after prize.
Heaven knows how much publicity value Benetton as a knitwear organisation get from Benetton as a racing team, but it must be zillions of dollars. And they have put together a superb collection of people. They've got a production and development facility that most of the teams would give their eye teeth for. They've just worked at it, which is what you have to do in Formula One and in life.
Formula One is so competitive that it's tiny percentages in every area that make the difference between winning a race and almost being midfield. And if you look at the percentage time difference between a car that's on pole and a car that's 3rd or 4th on the grid, you're talking about fractions of a percent. So I think the reason why our car is going to be more competitive this year than last year is improvements in all the different areas.
Ross Brawn, the quiet, deliberate designer, is one of the very, very best. The momentum in design and development terms that Benetton have got behind them with their people and their facilities and their money is irresistible. Ross will get it right very quickly.
Racing cars don't come cheap. A Benetton will set you back about £10 million. They're made from exotic materials like those used in the aerospace industry. Gone are the days of metal chassis. Now, it's carbon fibre.
During the early 80s, we saw carbon fibre being used on Formula One cars, and that's made an enormous difference. I mean, the cars today are much safer, they're much stronger, much stiffer. Some of the alloys we're now using didn't exist 15, 20 years ago.
Designing a racing car has its own special problems. Because of its huge acceleration, something apparently simple like getting the fuel into the engine isn't at all straightforward.
For instance, in cornering, the fuel that's contained within the fuel tank will be almost vertical against the sidewall of the fuel cell. So you need to design a system that can cope with that. It's quite an important area of car performance, which I'm a little bit loath to go into too much detail, because it is an area where we think we have an advantage over our competitors.
It's not only the fuel that gets pushed around in cornering. It's uncomfortable for the driver. He has to endure huge lateral forces on his head, and that puts enormous strain on his neck muscles. A personalised seat is essential.
There's foam in the bottom, so you can...
In mid-January, Benetton's new driver, Gerhard Berger, went to the Oxfordshire factory for his seat fitting.
Okay? Yeah.
Foaming plastic is poured into a bin liner. As it expands, it moulds itself around the driver.
We'll have to pour it in.
Because Berger's so tall, the car has had to be lengthened too.
So we need to readjust
Yeah, I just would like that you just go to the maximum.
He's a veteran in the racing world, having driven for many different teams. Last year it was Ferrari.
And for the possibility. I experienced the difference because I've been in Ferrari, I went to an English team, I come back to Ferrari. I prefer the English mentality to the work. It's more detail work, it's more taking care more about details, less emotional, and so I'm looking forward.
By the end of January, the schedule was slipping slightly. This year's car should have been ready for its first test run, but it was still in the workshop.
It's pretty tight. I mean, we're planning to run at Donington next week, either Tuesday or Thursday. And I think we'll be fortunate if we run Tuesday, but certainly by Thursday we'll be running. It's always it's a difficult time because you can get there, but if you cut too many corners on quality, so it just costs you more time. And so we're very conscious of the fact that when we go running, it's got to be with a car that's correct. We could have been running a week ago, but the car wouldn't have been how I wanted it.
Having worked through the night, the team finally had the car ready early in the morning of the 2nd of February. For its first run, transporters took it not to Donington, which was covered in snow, but to Silverstone.
We'll go as soon as we've got the tyres on. Okay.
Here there was no snow, but the temperature was below freezing. As usual, the tyres had been heated with electric blankets, but the bitter cold could still have an adverse effect on the car's handling. Benetton's other new driver, Jean Alesi, was to be the very first person to drive the car. Like Berger, he too had moved over from Ferrari. His job today was to find out how well the new car would perform.
We're obviously looking for normal sets of conditions, oil pressures, temperatures, reaction times of the hydraulics, the systems and so on.
John, don't operate the neutral switch if you're in first gear. You have to use the clutch pedal if you're in first gear. Okay.
French engineers from Renault were there too, to check on how well their engine would work in the new car. The car was to have its press launch 3 days later, but on that cold February morning, they were still not sure just what would happen when it was run round the track for the first time. The car has a top speed of about 200 miles an hour, and it can accelerate from 0 to 60 in less than 3 seconds. As it turned out, all the car's systems worked well, but in the freezing cold, the tyres didn't have enough grip.
I cannot brake at all, you know, it's so cold. No.
So the car's easy to control in these slippery conditions?
Actually, because we are in this kind of condition, I would say I'm very impressed because should be very slippery, and it's not. If you look the condition of everything, I feel a very, very, very good grip. And the control of the car, it's very easy.
Despite the weather, it was a promising start. But the British are good at this. The majority of Formula One cars are built or designed in Britain.
There's a view that British culture is suited to motor racing, and I think there's some truth in that. We seem to have the right attitude and approach, a good balance between commitment, enthusiasm, pragmatism and so on. But I think it's historical. I think when you get a nucleus of people who design Formula One cars, then that spawns more people who can design and so on.
It wasn't always the case.
And the new Maseratis are out in front. Villaresi now leads on 18th. Britain's first Grand Prix for many years is an overwhelming success.
Stirling Moss drove at a time when Britain was not so dominant.
Originally, motor racing I always felt was an Italian sport. They have the enthusiasm for the cars and they're passionate about it and they're great artists. But then it got to a point where you needed special metallurgy and all these sort of things crept in. Then it became a little bit difficult. And the English, thank goodness, came up. And of course now, England makes the best cars, gearboxes, engines, whatever you like.
It really took off in the 60s with the brilliant innovator Colin Chapman and his Lotus team. The cars had become lower and sleeker, and near the end of the decade, they introduced the revolutionary aerofoils. These looked like inverted aeroplane wings. The idea was to fly the car into the ground.
Well, I guess the concept of downforce or reverse lift hadn't really been considered. We sat around watching aeroplanes take off, but we didn't think about doing the reverse and pushing cars into the ground.
Although they did the trick, enabling the car to corner faster without skidding off, these early wings were relatively inefficient. 10 years later, Lotus achieved downforce more effectively by lowering the car and shaping the underside so that aerodynamic forces sucked it down onto the ground.
I got involved in motor racing as downforce was becoming an understood factor. And when Lotus did their ground effect car the first year, it just disappeared. It was 2 or 3 seconds a lap quicker than anybody. But once we understood the principles, we all caught up, and it's been a major factor since then.
To maximise the downforce, a wind tunnel is used. Racing car designers soon realised that such devices could help them win races. They're so vital that Benetton uses a wind tunnel at Farnborough's Defence Research Agency for most of the year. They experiment with various body shapes to see what improves the overall aerodynamics.
The aerodynamic idea is to increase the downforce as much as possible. That downforce will glue the car onto the road. It will push the tyres hard into the tarmac, allowing them to grip much better in the corners. And indeed, once the car gets up to around 100 miles an hour or so, it's producing enough downforce that it would actually be able to drive along the ceiling. The downforce is greater than the weight of the car, and that will increase as the car gets faster and faster to several times the weight of the car.
Aerodynamics is the most important factor in designing fast racing cars. Here they were testing the effect of curved panels on the side of the car, known as barge boards. Sensors in the model measure the amount of downforce produced.
Hello? Hi, James.
You see the window?
I can only see one problem with that, and that's...
A high-quality computer links Farnborough to the Benetton factory 60 miles away, so the engineers can sort out their ideas.
the side of the chassis.
Downforce is so effective at enabling cars to go faster that each year, for safety reasons, the governing body introduces regulations to reduce it and slow the cars down.
It's the same for each team, so we have to go through this process of improving the car, and then the regulations pull it back. We improve the car, pull it back. Might seem a bit futile, but if we didn't do that, we would just be getting pulled back the whole time, and we would fall behind the opposition.
By mid-February, testing had moved to the warmth of Portugal. Temperatures here were closer to those the drivers would encounter during the season. Each day, work started before dawn.
What are you doing?
You are extraordinary, sir.
Not the bloody way. Come on, move it.
This is the BBC.
You can't, what? You can't have the BBC. It's too early in the morning. Go away!
Pre-brief for today's programme. Arno, engine programme.
Engine program today. First of all, still continuing working on idle control. It's really you to tell us if you feel something.
Testing is done to check the effects of various modifications. One change that all the teams have had to adopt this year is the raised sides at the rear of the cockpit. This is to protect the driver, but when Berger first drove the car, they discovered there was a problem.
Okay for the run.
The air intake to the engine is the hole just above the driver's head. The engine needs a smooth supply of air to work properly, but those raised side panels and Berger's helmet were causing turbulence.
You have the engine inlet just on the top of your head, and once the engine is running, you have different pressures and different airflow, and that affects the whole area here, And if you do it in the wind tunnel, you don't have an engine running, you have just the normal airflow. So basically you have to do on the circuit some fine-tuning for the engine performance.
Fine-tuning meant altering the shape of those side panels until the turbulence disappeared.
The head is a very critical area, and new racing cars usually they start some turbulence in this area over 250 kilometers, and that means you get some buffeting, you get some head lifting, and always on a new car you have to sort this out, and it takes always 1-2 days, and that's what we did yesterday. We find a good solution, and it's fine.
While out on the track, the car radios back information about what's happening to it, so the engineers can monitor the effect of the changes. The newly modified barge boards were tried out on a Lazy's car.
They affect the downforce of the car, so they give the car more grip. But they also have an effect on the car over the bumps. It can make the car more critical over the bumps, so that's why we want to try them on the circuit. Because if you can make a car that's very insensitive to bumps, then the driver will have more confidence and will drive faster.
Several other teams were also testing the cars in Portugal, and each checked how fast their rivals were by using speed traps at the side of the track. For the first time, Benetton's drivers got an inkling of what they were up against.
I don't think either of them are particularly happy, because we're not a second quicker than anyone else, and that's always the case. You know, we're there at the front, but we're no quicker than anyone else, and so they're never happy at that stage. And I think they both feel the car, they need some more time in the car with their engineers to fine-tune it.
The reflexes and reactions of the drivers are as fine-tuned as the cars.
Okay, that wasn't too bad. Now brake hard. Third, second. Take a late turn in.
Most of those aspiring to Formula One never make it.
To take part is what matters. That's absolute bull. What matters is trying to win. You've got to be keeping your mind right on what you're doing all the time to be able to actually take a racing car and use it at its limit. People often say, what does it require? It requires not, people think it's bravery. Bravery is its first relation to stupidity. It doesn't require that. It requires a knowledge and understanding of the vehicle. You've got to have a very good interpretation of the message the car gives you. It's just like if you're flirting with a girl. I mean, if you get a message she's going to clout you, you back off a bit. You know, let's face it. If you think that you're doing rather well, then you push on a bit. Well, it's the same with a car. I mean, you're going into a corner, and if you feel, well, my gosh, that's as far as they're going to go. If you can interpret that early enough, you say, well, I won't do any more. I'll try it another way.
Hydraulic jacks on the corners of a cradle lift the wheels on a road car so that it skids easily. In this school for racing drivers, they have to learn to sense the point of skidding and then drive as close to that limit as possible.
In fact, the car is always on the point of skidding. You're always trying to get to that fine limit, but the only way a driver finds the limit of the car under braking or through the corners is by exceeding it. And so often when you watch Formula One, quite often they will lock a wheel or two wheels braking for a corner, and then often the next lap they won't, because they would have just found the limit on that first lap round. So the skid training means that you've got the confidence to push the car to the limit, push it beyond the limit, but you can still come out of the corner at the other end and stay on the track.
I think you can learn it. I mean, obviously you need a level of talent. But it's like every sport, you know, you see in a sport, you always see different kind of characters. It's the same in football, it's the same in tennis. You see big talents, usually the big talents are lazy. You see the other ones, they are not so big talents, but they are working very hard on themselves. And in the end of the day, they come together. And even in the end of the day, most of the time, I think the hard workers are going to be ahead. And very seldom you have both together, but sometimes you have both together, a very big talent and a hard worker, and that's going to be the great champion.
But the very top drivers need something else as well.
Schumacher has a look.
You need intelligent drivers. They need to understand what's happening. And I think if you look at all the recent world champions, Prost, Senna, even Mansell, Schumacher, they've all been very bright people. And I think you need to be intelligent to win world championships. One of the things I was most impressed by with Schumacher, for instance, is when he overtook Hill at Estoril last year. And what you saw there was that Schumacher was holding back from Hill so that Hill couldn't see the manoeuvre. But Schumacher was taking a line into a particular corner, which was not the normal line.
And Schumacher comes right up alongside Hill and goes through.
That part of the track was dirty and dusty, and he was basically cleaning that bit of the track. He was getting it ready for his manoeuvre. So then when he got up to Hill and used a bit of track Hill wasn't expecting him to use, then it was already, he knew how slippery it was, it had been cleaned a little bit. And that's a thinking driver, that's a guy who wins world championships.
Melbourne, Australia, and the first Grand Prix of the season. Things did not start well for Benetton. In early morning practice, Alesi's engine failed and he spun off the track. The car was brought back to the garage for repairs. With only a few hours left before the qualifying session in the afternoon, the team had to work quickly to replace the engine and repair the car. Forced to stand and wait, Alesi was losing valuable experience of the track conditions. And then, to make matters worse, Gerhard Berger, pushing his car to the limit, lost it on a bend. Spinning out of control, his car ended up damaged as well.
You okay, yeah?
Yeah, no problem.
I was just preparing myself for qualifying. I just had to go a bit quicker, go a bit to the limit, and I had a quite good lap until there, but I was a bit too quick and I lost the car.
Spectators were already streaming in and time was running out. After inspecting the damage, they decided Berger would have to drive the reserve car, but they had hardly any time left to set it up for him. They made it. Just. By the time the qualifying session was due to start, the cars were ready. But both drivers had missed valuable hours of practice.
And going out now is the Benetton Renault of Gerhard Berger, who crashed this morning.
All the drivers had 12 laps in which to drive as fast as possible around the circuit. The driver with the fastest lap time got the coveted pole position, or first on the starting grid. Perhaps because of that lack of practice, both Alesi and Berger did not do so well as expected. They were 6th and 7th. They would have to work hard during the next day's race, but they were still in with a chance.
I think we'll be in better shape for the race because we've got the warm-up to come, and hopefully we can have a good program tomorrow morning. If we have no problems tomorrow, then I think we can have a good race.
Australians, oh, let us rejoice, for we are young and free, with golden soil and wealth for toil.
Alesi and Berger now had 58 laps in which to attempt the immensely difficult job of overtaking the front runners.
And you ride with Jean Alesi, looking at the Ferrari of Eddie Irvine in front of him. Jean Alesi, ex-Ferrari driver, chasing this year's Ferrari car, and Lacey is settling down with Benetton extremely well. I've just been talking to Pat Simmons, his race engineer, and Lacey, who has this rather hysterical image, is actually a much calmer man, Pat says, than you would think.
Bodywork and tyres. We have seen your problem. We will be ready with bodywork and tyres. Speed limit is in the way.
The team was standing by to get a Lacey back in the race as quickly as possible. But Ross Brawn walked across from the pit wall and, waving his arms, signalled, "Forget it." As far as Alesi was concerned, it was the end. He was out of the race. Now everything depended on Berger.
Berger in 7th place and Mika Salo in the Tyrrell as they go into turn 1. There's the Austrian Gerhard Berger. Schumacher has rejoined the race in 4th place, ahead of the battle between Mika Häkkinen for 5th against Rubens Barrichello and Gerhard Berger. The three of them are still together, 4th, 5th and 6th. That's the quickest top stop we've had so far. Gerhard Berger in 9.1 seconds. And a credit to the Benetton team, because that's 2.5 seconds faster than Eddie Irvine and 3 seconds faster than Schumacher. Schumacher down to 9th position, a lap adrift. He's a lap behind, and out of the race goes Michael Schumacher. And Damon Hill crosses the line to win the Australian Grand Prix. The crowd know a good winner when they see one, and Damon Hill is that man.
Berger finished 4th. Good, but not as good as was hoped for.
Australian Grand Prix, the first one at Melbourne, and very much a race to remember.
Obviously, it was a finish with Gerhard, so that was some points, but John should have done a lot better. And it's a shame he had the accident, because that I think he would have been a lot closer. I think he was getting impatient, trying to get past Irvine. He was a lot quicker than Irvine. Irvine was holding him up. He wanted to get past him and make some progress on the guys ahead. We've learned a lot this weekend, how we work with the drivers and so on. So we've got a test between now and Brazil. We need to do a lot of work there. And we need to sit down with the drivers and find a way of working better together. I think the great thing about motor racing is you have one bad race, but the next one can be fantastic. So we're just going to get our act together. We've been in this position before, and we're not going to stay here.
In the 5 Grand Prix races since Melbourne, Benetton has come 2nd in Brazil and 3rd in Argentina and San Marino. They've got 10 races left to score their first victory.